Hey, how's it going?
Good, thank you.
All right, I guess a good couple more minutes. People are still joining. All right. Give it a couple more minutes. All right, let's get started. How are y'all doing? I'm a big fan of interactive presentations. I don't like to be the only one speaking. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts while I'm presenting, I appreciate like being interrupted and hearing from the audience so that I'm not the only one speaking. So if you have questions, thoughts, just interject, raise your hand. I'll try and catch it, put it in chat. Yeah, so we'll get started. People are still coming in. So just by a show of hands, so we can get your hands on the raising hand button, how many of you are like super familiar with social media or use it on a daily basis. It's pretty much everybody. All right. Awesome. Very cool. So hopefully this will be a good 45-minute presentation for you guys on some best practices that I've learned over the years of working in social media in higher education. So just a little bit about me. I am the marketing manager for Lehigh University in UCPA. So what that means is I work with Lindsay Labresco on social media strategy, digital marketing, digital advertising, and all of the duties is assigned. So anything that you see on social media is usually something that has come out of our office or sometimes some of your offices. I'm a big fan of amplifying other social accounts on campus. So I know I work with a lot of you that I see on here to amplify your social content and helping you share your story. So we'll get started. I have my social links here. If you don't already know who I am or don't already follow me, I'm more active on Twitter, although that's kind of changing. We'll talk a little bit about that. The landscape, right, of Twitter is always changing. It feels like by the hour. There was a few weeks, earlier this year where we had no idea what was happening with Twitter, if it was going to even, survive the day. It always felt like it was Armageddon on that platform. So my other social accounts are linked. If you want to follow me or connect with me there, we can. So we'll, this session is basically, we're going to talk about how things have changed, and how things are going to change, and how to really implement those changes into your storytelling and your social media strategy. So really the first thing we're going to talk about is understanding your audience. That's my big thing, is you really can't have a successful social strategy or really tell your story on social without first understanding who's going to be viewing your content, who your audience is, and really understanding who they are is really key to making sure that you have a successful, social strategy. And then creating a consistent brand tone and voice is really important. I don't know if you have, I've been at Lehigh about 1.5 years now, and I've really tried to develop a voice since taking over for the person who was in my role before. And so just giving it a unique voice that people can expect, and how to develop that voice. And then visual content, right? Everybody loves video. Everybody loves cool photos. So how do we implement that, and how do we use that to tell our story? And then my favorite thing that I always preach is incorporating user-generated content. Our students especially love to share their content, and they love to see it when it's on, a big platform, or when one of our accounts shares it. And it makes them feel good. They'll share it with their friends. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the big one, leveraging analytics, right? Most of our decisions in our social media strategy are made by analytics, how things perform, what trends we see in the numbers, and how shifts in the algorithm are contributing to those numbers. And so we have to be reactive all the time. And so the best way to be reactive is looking at the numbers and seeing what the numbers are telling us. All right, so we'll jump right in. So understanding your audience, right? Who is your audience? When I first got to Lehigh, I had to learn who our audience was, right? It's obviously students, but then it's way more than students at Lehigh, because we have graduate students, we have professors, we have faculty, staff, the Bethlehem community, right? We're talking to all those people through several accounts. And so we have to really create a message that meets all of those people. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to only talk to professors or only talk to graduate students, right? Our main audience for our social media content is generally prospective students, right? We want students to come here, but then we also want to keep students here. So our two main audiences are prospective students and then current students that are here on campus. It's really important for us to have a message that they understand, that they look for, and that they expect. So if you look at Lehigh's social media accounts anytime during the semester when students are on campus, you're going to see a lot of information on Instagram for students specifically, right? We know that's where our students are at. We know that's where they're looking for content. And so that's where we're really going to meet them. If we just put our content on Twitter or Facebook, we're going to miss out on Gen Z. They're not on Facebook. Their parents might be. And so that's a different, strategy, right? We use the parents' Facebook group differently than we would our Instagram page. We communicate differently with the parents than we would with students. And so it's really important to understand like who that audience is. I see Kathleen is on here in LTS. Her audience is just like ours, the entire campus, right? So students, faculty, staff, and it's really important to figure out ways to communicate with them in the ways that they're expecting. So, who do you want to hear your story? If you're, for example, if we're gearing up for a big admissions campaign, we're going to create content that is specific to prospective students. We're going to talk a lot about what Lehigh is about, what you can study at Lehigh, why, South Mountain is an awesome experience. And that's not necessarily the content that current students want to hear. They already know all about it. They're the ones contributing to that story and that content. So giving them, giving your content to prospective students is going to be very different, but you need to focus on who those people are and really tailor that strategy to them. So one of the things that I love to do is see who our competitors are talking to and see how they're talking to the audience that we're looking at, right? So who are your peers? Who are your competitors? And how are they using social media to tell a story? I think about like somebody that an account that I really love is the University of Michigan. I think they do a really great job for such a large brand at telling the University of Michigan story in really unique ways. And they don't always do it the same way, but it's a consistent brand voice. Their audience expects it, but they're also reaching a very specific audience, right? They're reaching those students who don't necessarily know all about the University of Michigan and the University of Michigan brand. And they're attracting them to the university. And once they get them there, then they shift their strategy to, how they communicate and how they meet their audience on social. And so I always look for inspiration. And that's just one of the areas that I look to. So I'd encourage, find out who your competitors are or who your peers are in the social space and see what they're doing. Find the people that are the most successful at it. And you don't have to copy them, but you can replicate, the same success they have to make it, Lehigh specific. Focus groups, right? I also love focus groups, and you can get focus group trained and become an expert on focus groups, but really you can do focus groups anytime you have students or anytime you have students or your audience in person with you. Just bounce questions off of them. We have a lot of student workers in our office, and I make it a real priority to meet with them and just ask them questions, no agenda, just like, hey, what are some pain points that you're seeing at Lehigh? And I'll give an example. We have a social media street team, and we were in a meeting planning some content, and one of the street team members was late to the meeting, and they were talking about the bus schedule and the new bus schedule, and they really gave our office some insight into how the bus is run and how to communicate how the bus is run. And so they created this entire presentation that went up on social media that laid out the bus schedule changes. And so that was driven by students, right? Communicating to our audience, students, right? A message that our office probably wouldn't have even known about or known how to communicate. And that happened because of focus groups, just sitting there, talking to them, learning from them, hearing their pain points and picking their brain. So then tailoring content to meet the needs, interests, and preferences of your audience, right? So less is always more. I know we always get hey, can you just throw this up on social media? Hey, can you throw this up on Twitter or Facebook? And a lot of times the answer is no. It doesn't fit the strategy. It doesn't meet a goal other than just to throw it up there. There needs to be a strategy behind it. Is it communicating something important? Is it something that students want to see or need to see? Is it relevant to the content that you're sharing? Always make sure that you're not over posting. The algorithm really hates over posting. It will not only not distribute the content that you're posting, but it'll hurt your future content, right? The algorithm will say, okay, this person posts 10 times a day. Nobody's engaging with it. Nobody really wants to see that content. So every time they post, we're not going to distribute it to their audience. So it really hurts your distribution of content to your audience. And that's one of the things you want to try to avoid. So I always say less is more. Try to combine. If you have multiple posts, if you have multiple messages, try to combine them in the best way possible. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to post a lot of information. We get that all the time. So I think if you develop a strategy around less is more, that will help you in how to reach your audience without getting hurt by the algorithm. Mandy, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what is overposting?
That's a good question.
And just to give a little context, I work in the College of Arts and Sciences in the graduate programs, and we're just starting to create and build our social media presence. So should we aim to post once a week or?
Yeah, I hate to give like a certain amount of posts to do per day. I know a lot of social media managers will be like, you got to post at least once a day. I don't ever prescribe a certain number of posts. I think your content will determine how much you post, right? So how many stories are you creating that can go on social media? If you're creating a bunch, well then sure, once a day or however many times a week is perfect.
Okay.
But I also think too, sometimes when you post, especially on Twitter, people can miss your content. So reposting content at different times of the day is really helpful.
Okay.
We do that a lot. So sometimes we'll look at analytics from an article we post and see how many link clicks it got. And if it didn't get a lot of link clicks during a time where we think people should be clicking that link, we'll go ahead and post it again a little later in the day or post it, at a different time the next day. So reposting content, resharing content is always okay. As long as you're doing it in a non-annoying way or non-repetitive way that's going to hurt you in the algorithm. Spacing out that content is good. I would say, to post a couple times a week, but don't force it, right? If you don't have content, don't force the content. If you don't have content, you can always interact with other accounts or other so like, for example, you're in the graduate office, you can interact with the main undergraduate account or something, retweet their content, share their content, if you don't necessarily have, content for that day.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's so helpful. Appreciate it.
Emily, I see you have your hand raised.
Am I unmuted? Just a general question. I feel like so many offices have accounts. And so I'm wondering if there's some type, and I don't know if you're going to cover this here, but like if there's some type of kind of coordination or just so it's not everyone posting the same. I feel like you're going to wind up losing followers, I would think, if everyone's kind of in their own world posting.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great point. And that's something that our office talks about a lot, especially like as we think about the launch of the strategic plan. We assume a lot of people are going to share that content, right? So we need to focus our content around something very specific to our message, and then give those accounts messages that they can share. But honestly, like I think too, our audiences are sometimes very different. A great example of that is when we collaborate with alumni development, alumni relations with their social accounts. They have a different audience than our main account. It's very interesting, right? So we'll do a collaboration post and we'll see that 50% of the audience that it's reaching aren't even following the main Lehigh account. And so that's super, super interesting because it means that they're seeing new content or our main Lehigh account content for the very first time sometimes. So, you know, you may think like, okay, somebody's already shared this, but your audience may not have seen that. And so I think it's okay to sometimes share that. You know, I would say you could change the copy up a little bit, make it more specific to your audience or specific to your department. That's what we really try and do, obviously, because alumni relations is very different than, you know, recruiting students, student retention, like the Lehigh message that we are trying, you know, to put out there. So those messages are going to differ for us, but I think too, like, it's okay to share the same content. Especially when you're scrolling, you know, I think about it as a user, and I look at other brands and I'm scrolling through Twitter and I see brands sometimes share the same content as another brand, and it pops up in my feed more, and I'm more inclined to click on it if I see more people sharing it. Like, oh, this must be a big deal. I see I missed a question in here. Overposting versus over storying on Insta. Okay, that's a really great on Instagram specifically. Yes. You know, I hate overposting on Instagram. It is a very algorithm driven platform. And if you get dinged by the algorithm, your content can sometimes just, you know, stop being populated. So we try not to overshare. But then on the flip side of that, when you have your Instagram story, we found that sometimes there is not really a certain number that hurts you when you're sharing on stories. So when we have a lot of content to share, we will use Instagram stories as kind of like our dumping ground, because we know students are looking for a lot of that information. So they're going to click through it, they're going to look at it, they're going to see it. But you have to structure in a way that is, you know, can communicate that information. So I think about like this weekend we shared, or last week we shared our first destination images of students, where they're going. And I think we shared like 50 different images, and those were 50 singular Instagram stories. And they're always our highest performing Instagram stories because they share it. So even though we post 50 Instagram stories in one day, it's not necessarily a bad thing because all of it is being shared. So I think it really depends on the content. Is it going to get shared? How many times is it going to get shared? And if it's not going to get shared and you're not going to get a lot of shares, then yeah, it could be a negative. But then if you know that people are going to share it, or you know your audience is going to be sharing it, then I think it's okay to, you know, quote unquote, overpost. You know, I think it just depends on the content. I hate to say it depends, because it really does. I mean, you have to kind of experiment sometimes. I think social media is a grounds for testing things out and failing and trying new things, because the algorithm is always shifting. I mean, it can shift on, you know, on a daily basis. You know, Instagram went from promoting reels like 90% to 10% reels to photos, right? So they were heavy on reels. They said, create reels. Reels is what we're going for. We want to compete with TikTok. And last month they came back and said, actually, you know what? We're not going to distribute reels as much. We're going back to photos, and photos are now going to be, you know, the main distribution in the feed. And then, you know, this week it's kind of like a 50-50. So it went from 90-10 to 50-50. So it's, and we can see that because we're experimenting with reels and photos and galleries, and we see which one, you know, which type of content is being, you know, being shown to our audience more. And that's what we'll create more content of. And then, you know, stick to your story. I mean, it's ultimately like, I'm not a big fan of like going off brand or telling stories that aren't really related to your brand. You know, we're not gonna, you know, I know people love the National Day of posts. We don't do a lot of that because it's not really, you know, a lot of those stories aren't necessarily relevant. Now, some are, you know, like National Professor Day or something like that. Those are the type of things that like would, you know, align with our story, but we're not going to go out of our way to do like National Turtle Day, right? We're not going to post about that unless a professor has a specific story about turtles. Then we'll take that and say, oh, for National, Turtle Day, so and so professors, we're going to research around turtles, right? But unless there's a specific story, we're not going to post about it. So that's audience. Any other questions about audience? How to find your audience? I know on a college campus, the audience varies, and you have to shift and you have to mold your content to be very different than what a brand outside of higher education has to do. Right, and so brand voice and tone, right? One of the big things about creating a brand voice is your audience is expecting your content, right? They know it's coming, and having them be prepared for your voice is going to help amplify that, right? So I try to think about Lehigh's brand voice on Twitter and Instagram as a sophisticated fun, right? We're not too overly silly. We're not snarky. And we're not really that funny, but we can be fun. We can have fun, especially when we make fun of Lafayette or troll Lafayette. We like to be very sophisticated in how we talk about Lehigh, how we talk about our research, but also like make sure that we're fun, right? We're trying to reach kids that are in high school, right? They are on social media and they're looking for fun. So we try not to take ourselves too seriously, but also we understand we're an elite institution, right? So there is that, gray area of molding and blending your brand voice to match what your brand is. So I try to, not shift that voice very much. We try to limit the amount of people that posts across our accounts. But the people that do post across the accounts understand, like, this is the type of voice that we're writing in. We use, on Instagram, for example, we try to use some emojis, but we don't overdo it. On Twitter, we try to keep everything very brief, but then we'll also reply. We'll use the reply feature to reply to accounts. When we retweet different people, we do it in that fun tone, but also sophisticated. So it's very specific to Lehigh. I worked at another institution where our brand voice was not fun at all. It was just, a higher ed, this is our voice and that's the way it's going to be. And that's what people expected, right? They didn't expect that fun tone on social media. And I think that's totally okay. If you look at a lot of different universities, the ones that have a consistent brand voice are the ones that are usually the most successful, and the ones that are, having their audience that see growth in their audience. And so some tips for that. Go ahead.
Just real quick on that, Taylor, as far as the audience and like you said, you're going after the high school audience as a big piece. We're talking about, Facebook, Instagram. Are there other places where they're living? And, I was told like Facebook is like, for people my age and that kind of thing. Are you running into that? And are we like hunting in the right place, I guess is a way of asking it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Facebook is an older audience for sure, but that's not to say that students don't have Facebook accounts. They do. They're just not as active. And that's where it goes back to focus groups, asking our students where they're at, what are they using? When we started developing, we started developing a TikTok strategy for the main Lehigh account. And our street team was like, we're not really using TikTok, especially not using it to see Lehigh's content, because of how TikTok works. The For You page, they may never see our content, right? They're not looking, it's never going to get distributed to them because of how that algorithm works. And so we kind of shifted, and we're not really as active on TikTok because that's not necessarily where our audience is at. Now, that's not to say we don't post there. We do post occasionally, but I think the admissions office does a really incredible job of how they use TikTok to meet their audience, right? They are creating content that is so unique to admissions that it gets distributed to people looking to apply to college. So they may have never heard about Lehigh, but now they're seeing an admissions TikTok of the admissions team dancing or, reviewing admissions letters and giving advice to people applying to college, whether or not they apply at Lehigh or not. They're seeing that content and they may get a follow. But their numbers are incredible because it's authentic to the admissions team, and they have really developed a strategy to reach a new audience for Lehigh specific to like enrolling in college. So I hope that answers your question. I think it just, the platform of where your audience is at really depends, right? So parents, we know parents are on Facebook. So if we want to communicate something to parents, we're going to post that on Facebook, share it in the parents' Facebook group. We're not going to post that same content on Instagram because we know parents may not see that. Even though some parents are on Instagram, the majority of our audience doesn't care about what we're, the messages we're communicating to parents. On Twitter, that's where the algorithm and the changing landscape is always shifting. I would have said, 6 months ago that Twitter is the place where you deliver breaking news, where you promote your articles that you write, where you're giving real-time information to people. And that's kind of changed, right? They now have a For You page that they push. The whole debacle around verified and unverified and boosting verified accounts versus not boosting verified accounts really changes how content is delivered on the platform. And so it's kind of the Wild West right now. People are trying to figure out how their content is distributed on the platform. I mean, we're still trying to figure that out as well. We have seen a steady decline in followers and content distribution since Elon purchased Twitter. I mean, there is a direct correlation to the date he bought Twitter to the number of followers that we were seeing and the amount of engagement on our tweets. And so it's kind of like, do we invest the amount? Do we put in more work to figure out the algorithm, or do we just shift to where we know that we're going to get the best ROI for our content? Sarah asked a question in chat. Do you have documentation of these guidelines about voice, et cetera, that you share with other social media posters on your team? So yes and no. It's more of like, so there's really only 2 people in our office that post on our social accounts. And so it's more of like a discussion that we have. When we have students post, the students understand our voice, but also I want them to be authentic when they're posting. So like if a street team member is doing a takeover, or if a street team member is going to be posting something they're creating, I really want them to use their voice, their student voice. So that's the only time I think it would shift. But I think maybe we should have some documentation about voice that we can share. So that's, something I think we can definitely create, because it's, it shouldn't change. But I think it changes based on who's running the account. So it can be specific to you, it can be specific to the department. But then I think it can change, as your strategy changes, as your audience changes, that voice can also change.
Thank you.
Be honest. So I'm a fan of honesty. Like, I think especially when you're selling a university or you're talking about a university, it really helps to be honest. We're not perfect, right? So like, we're going to make mistakes. Everybody does. And especially on social, people make mistakes a lot. So I think owning those mistakes and like not trying to hide them, just being honest really helps elevate that brand voice even more. So like if there's a typo, or if there's an error in a link and somebody's like, hey, the link's not working, we'll reply right away and say, hey, thanks for the heads up. We appreciate it. Here's the updated link. And then if something's misspelled, we'll razz Twitter and be like, oh, thanks for the edit button, Twitter, that doesn't exist. So, or did exist and then Elon took it away, unless so it's just kind of like one of those things where we really try to be overly honest about the content we're putting out there. And that really helps develop that voice. Because if your audience expects you to be honest about things, then they can trust you more, and it leads to an increase in brand trust and, a favorability about the brand, and just overall perception about the brand story you're telling. And then don't overthink it, right? Like sometimes I will sit there and think about a tweet for 20 minutes. And then at minute 21, I'll be like, what am I doing? This is a waste of time. Just, the simplest tweet is the answer. Don't overthink it. Don't spend too much time stressing about, making your post perfect or making your content perfect. It has a shelf life on social media of minutes, hours, maybe a day. I mean, so, tomorrow your post is going to be gone. Nobody's going to see it. So don't overthink it. Don't spend a lot of time on it. I will say the caveat to that is like, when something is going to get a lot of views, or something is really important to communicate, that's when you spend the time to make sure it's right. I think about like commencement this weekend, right? We want to make sure that our content is right because we know it's going to get shared by a ton of people, families, friends, media outlets. So we want to focus our energy on making sure those are right, rather than focusing our energy on things that are going to be gone in an hour or things that are not going to be as widely shared. And so examples of strong brand voices and tones. I love Wendy's. I don't know if anybody has seen Wendy's on Twitter. They're a really great example of a brand on social that has developed a voice that matches their brand. But then it's a part of who they are, right? So they're snarky, they're sarcastic, they're mean sometimes and they troll other accounts. But I mean, the reason they do that is because of that, intentional structure around their voice on social. And then Slim Jim is another one. That one of the things they do, they insert themselves into a lot of conversations, which I think is a really great brand strategy. Like, who would have thought Slim Jim would be one of the top brands on social media? It's just very interesting. So overall, it helps their brand. People see it on social media and then go and buy it or see it when they're in the store. So that's any other questions about audience before I move on? All right. So visual content is really this is my wheelhouse. This is I have a background in like video production, and so really incorporating visual content into how you tell your story on social is really important, especially as a lot of the platforms are shifting to incorporating more photography. If you look at Facebook lately, I'm sure you've noticed they're pushing a lot of photos. They don't push links a lot anymore. Facebook used to be the place where you dumped your links, and now they don't really like you to put links on Facebook, and they're gonna not distribute it as much. They like photos. So the more photos that you can use that will help tell that story without linking off the platform, the better. So video is huge, right? Platforms that use short form video content like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you can use video to amplify your story, that is going to be key for you. There are so many tools that you can use, from CapCut to Canva. I know DAR uses PlayPlay, and they're really easy to use once you get to use them. Kathleen was just telling me about CapCut desktop version that I didn't even know existed. So all of these new social video editing companies are starting to launch more tools to make it easier to use video. And then obviously photo, if you have photos, that is going to be, something that you should always share. I think if you're sharing an article, it should always, or a link to something, a photo should always accompany it. You shouldn't be posting a link by itself. We try to avoid that on any platform, just because it doesn't look good, but then also the algorithm doesn't really, it's not going to pick it up. It's not going to share it as broadly as something that has a link and a photo. So your phone is your best tool, right? I can't tell you how many times I've just used my phone for videos. We have dozens of videos on our Instagram account, on our reels, that are shot on our phones. Krista knew whenever she goes to a photo shoot, she'll shoot photos of the event or the project she's shooting, and then she'll pull out her phone and shoot video and create a reel. So she's telling a story through photos, but then also through a reel, and then sharing that out. So it's a really great tool. I mean, everybody has a phone in your pocket that can shoot video, or most people do. It's just a matter of remembering to pull it out at the event you're at, or the location you're at, and hitting record. We always, forget to do that when we're in the moment, but it's just a matter of, remembering to do it and pull it out. Vertical versus horizontal. There's a lot of debate. I used to say, never shoot vertical, right? Never shoot vertical. But that's totally changed. It's almost like shoot vertical first and then think about horizontal. And that's a direct result of the algorithm shift. This TikTok, Instagram Reels, and even sometimes Facebook Reels, being vertical to match the phone. And that's where social media is at. It's usually on the phone. So shooting vertical when you're doing something specific for social media should always be a priority. If you're not, then shoot horizontal. If it's going to go on YouTube or go on your website, horizontal is what you should be doing. If it's for social, if it's not going to live on a website, it's not going to live on YouTube, shooting vertical should be a priority. And then user generated content, my favorite, right? The students love to create content. Empowering them to create content is super important. They are going to share that content on their own platforms. Their friends are going to share it. They love to see pictures of themselves. They love to, one of the coolest comments that I love getting is, you made it to the Lehigh Insta. Like, students love seeing themselves. So sharing photos of students, I think, is a really important way of sharing that user generated content. It increases engagement. It's authentic, right? We talked about that, being authentic. So some of the ways that we generate user content is through contests. We do a fall photo contest. I think we did one of our student interns did a contest for some photo contest. So contests are really great because you say, hey, if you submit your photo, we're going to share it, across our social platforms, and that leads to more engagement, more shares, and then profiling your users. So like who they are. One of the things that we do is every Thursday we have a takeover, a student takeover, where a student will, a day in the life, right? They'll go through their life and talk about their day. And so that's an opportunity to push, the events they're involved in, the groups they're involved in, the classes they take, but then it also just promotes the university in a really unique and authentic way. Polls, surveys, feedback. Where's your favorite place to study? Those are, that's super low hanging fruit. Generating that like very bottom level, easy to create, user interacted content, and then resharing it is another strategy we use. And then collabs. I don't know if anybody saw, we did a collab with CJ McCollum this weekend, and on Instagram Reels, and it's like our most liked post ever, most viewed post ever. And all that requires us doing is tagging CJ as a collaborator on Instagram. So Tyler, what's the best way to do a good collab? Honestly, the best way to do a good collab is like the CJ is a great example. We knew he was speaking. We edited a video, and then we just added him as a collaborator and let his team know, hey, if he wants to accept it, that'd be awesome. We did the same thing with USA Wrestling for the Women's Wrestling Club. They have like 40,000 followers. They're a national brand, and I saw that they were, promoting women's wrestling very heavily. And so I just messaged the account and I said, hey, are you cool? You guys want to do a collab? We've got this video. They were like, absolutely. Yeah. So we just tagged them and they shared it, and it gets distributed to their audience as well. So I don't know if there's a a best practice for doing a collab. I think it's just one of those things where it can happen organically. If you plan it out, that's always going to be better than just doing it, not. But I always tell people, like, if you have content that you think would work great on the Lehigh U account, go ahead and tag us. Go ahead and share that with us. I know we have a few minutes left. So if anybody, I know, Brian, you had a question about how to capture quality videos. I can, shoot me an email with any of those questions you have, and I'll get back to you guys with more in-depth answers. Analytics for the last part, I'll go through this really quickly, but it's something that requires probably a day of conversation to actually dive in and understand analytics. We try to really make sure that all of the strategy and the focus that we make on across all of social is driven by analytics. Does it work? How do you know it works? If you post something and it gets distributed to a lot of people, you see the numbers are great. Are you sure it even worked? Like, how do you know? And analytics is the way to tell it. It's a return. You're able to say, did we get our return on our investment for the amount of time we spent? If 50 people saw a post that you spent 8 hours on versus 100,000 people seeing a post that you spent 20 minutes on, so it helps you see the ROI and the time spent in creating your content. So we use Iconosquare, and I will see. I think I've got that pulled up. If not, I'll pull it up for you guys so you can see it. And this is a really great. Everyone can still see my screen, right? So I'm gonna give you all some inside baseball here. This is the platform that we use, and so we can track Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and then we also have Admissions uses our account as well to track their social. So I just wanted to show you this because I want to see if anyone could give me an answer. This is our follower growth for this year on Instagram. And does anyone know why we dropped off in followers in March? So like you can see this like super huge drop off March 23rd. We had a huge drop off of several hundred followers. You can put it into chat if anyone has an answer of why that drop off might have happened. There you go, Tyler. Yep. Great answer. Yep. That's it. Admissions. That's correct. We released admissions decisions that day. And so the students who didn't get in, I would do the same thing. I would go unfollow, right? They didn't let me in, I'm going to unfollow them. And so that is exactly what happened. We see that every year. We see that same cliff happen. It's a dramatic shift up and then a dramatic decline. And then it's a slow build until we get to about, January, February, and then it's an extreme ramp up. So that's how you can see in analytics, you can interpret those decisions and see this is how, we can explain a drop. If my boss comes to me and says, hey, what happened? Why are we seeing a 10% decline in numbers across social? Well, here's why. People didn't get in. So we'll get those followers back throughout the year. It's not a big loss for us because we expect it. We know it's going to happen. So, and then, we like Iconosquare. It's not that expensive. They've gone up recently, but they give a lot of in-depth data. One of the big things I look at is engagement rate. So you can see we're down 6.5% this year. The reason why we're down this year is because we've been posting more. So there's going to be a decline when you post more, and that's okay. We know that we're posting more. We know the engagement rate is going to decline a little bit. No, it's not that bad. I think we were at 4.1 last year. And you can compare previous years. So you can get super in-depth into the data. I'm a big data guy, so I love spending a lot of time, analyzing the data that we have. And you can say, we were 4.3 last year. So, we're still, batting in the same area. We're not down. But we do have an increase in the amount of people that we're reaching and the impressions we're seeing. So analytics is very important to how you're deciding what content to share, how it works. You can see the engagement rate on all of your posts, right? why did this one do a 4.8% engagement rate? This one had a 3.52. Why were those different? We can look into that and see, audience retention, the media we shared, and drawing some conclusions to shape the content we create in the future is super important. So I know we're at time. Does anyone have any questions? Anything that I may not have touched on? As always, if you have any questions about anything that I covered today, because I know it's super short, we can connect, shoot me an email. Happy to connect. Anything that I didn't cover that you want to know about, shoot me an email. I know there's always some things I didn't cover that people are always interested in.
interesting.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. So helpful.
Perfect. All righty. Well, thank you very much.
Are there ways to quickly reach out to you if we want to do stuff for our own individual offices and stuff like that?
Sure. Yeah. You can just shoot me an email. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Excellent.
My email is tas221@Lehigh. Put it in. There we go. All right. We'll see everybody later. Y'all have a good rest of your day.